or I'm the director of an organisation I founded called the Australian Close Encounter Resource Network. And I created it because there seemed to be no professional support for anyone who has any form of anomalous experiences, particularly what I would call extraterrestrial encounters of various forms. And it seemed to me that for those that came to me, they were very sane, they were very articulate, intelligent people that were experiencing something out of what we would normally call the normal human experience.
So how do you get that? How do you, in the medical side, how do you get that across? How do you get people to come to you? Surely it's a very outlandish thing in any country to sort of even have an organization.
I actually don't get people to come to me. I was approached by a gentleman in the first instance. Some people will know him because he's a researcher now in the UK called Ellis Taylor. He was my very first client. And he came to me and he said, look, Mary, there's support groups for everything. He said, but for this, they just think you're a loony. And what Ellis really convinced me of, not only was he perfectly sane and credible, but he also were having experiences that affected the whole family. It wasn't just himself waking up with strange marks on his body, shaved areas on his leg, for example, but his partner and the children were also having experiences. In fact, the whole family were really quite freaked out, and a lot of the relatives wouldn't come to the house because they said they thought there were demons or something there.
Now, is this happening in Australia?
This is happening everywhere.
No, but where you were then based?
Yes, I was in Perth, Western Australia, and I'd already heard about these kinds of experiences, more from the fact that I'm an eclectic reader. I'm very curious about anything that's strange, weird and wonderful. It just happens to be the nature of who I am. And I'd read 2 books at the time, which were very useful. One was by Dr. John Mack, obviously the former head of psychiatry at Harvard University, which was very useful because I felt he's very credible. He'd looked at this, he'd done all the psychological testing, and he was left with no doubt these people were having real experiences. And on top of that, of course, I read the very classic Whitley Strieber experience, Communion. In fact, I've read all of Whitley's books. And it was enough to give me a sense that there could be very much a tangible reality with this. In fact, I was doing advanced counselling at the time at the Wosley Institute, and I actually took him as a case study. And this was in supervision. And this was a group of people, including my supervisor, who was obviously a clinician, and there was a uniting minister, psychologist, and what have you. And I presented his case, and I gave various hypotheses. And it was interesting that not one of them suggested this gentleman was crazy. They all, in fact, started telling me about their own anomalous experiences, which was quite interesting. But I thought, well, if I can't get any help here in terms of helping this gentleman with his experiences, then I need to look elsewhere. And I looked to America, and I got particularly involved and I'm a member of the Academy of Clinical Close Encounter Therapists in America, which invites professional people, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, any clinician within the field to work with and be a resource for other people worldwide. And in fact, we've got a worldwide network with an asset. But I wanted something in Australia. And so my vision for ACERN was to create the first professional resource, and hopefully that would feed into other professional resources ultimately. But it's a long process. Well, Perth's not very big. They're considered the most isolated city in the world. And it's only just past 2 million. But believe it or not, the very first time I advertised in a local holistic magazine for a support group for abductees, as they were called then, I got 12 people contacting me. But I'd already been resourced by a number of other people. And I met through an organization which was to do with the paranormal, who mentioned a lady, a social worker who'd had experiences, Elizabeth Robinson, and we decided to start off running a support group, and that's how it started. But I'd already met a number of people by that time. They found me how, I don't know, because I did no advertising up to the support group, and that was only one advert. From then, I think I've got known through word of mouth and through articles and through the fact I've ended up doing a great deal of media about my work. Initially, I think, again, it's quite interesting how people do find you. I didn't even have a website then or anything like that. Some of it, as I say, was word of mouth, and I was a committee member of a particular organisation over there. And I think it was either through that. The first time I ever did anything more public was for a university, a lady doing a university course, and she interviewed me for her media, for one of her media units.
The thing which strikes me is that the academic level seems to be very open to this, and what your work was done. You weren't shunned in the same way as the late Dr. Mack.
It's interesting, yes, in a funny kind of way, it appeared that there was a certain amount of openness. We did a lot of talks at Murdoch University because Professor Frodsham was the one that headed this particular organisation, and it was called ASPR, the Australian Society for Psychical Research, and he actually created that 20 years before, and because he was a professor at Murdoch University, all our meetings were held, and we used to invite speakers from around Australia and overseas, and Professor Frodsham was recognised to be interested in the paranormal, and I think that was because of some of his own experiences at, and I'm not sure whether it was Cambridge or Oxford University where he got his degrees, but he was always very open, and he encouraged that kind of sharing. So he had a certain credibility anyway because of his position. But I think it was, again, a lot of the time, just little articles that were written about me, the odd newspaper article. So gradually I got known.
Were these
and
national?
Initially they were just within Western Australia. The odd radio show, I would talk on community radio, Triple J, which is like at the ABC. It's a bit like the BBC, but it's called the ABC. And, you know, it was things like that I eventually did because I felt so strongly that so many people were being diagnosed or misdiagnosed as having some kind of mental illness, when really in reality all they were having was an extraordinary human experience, which is obviously quite different. And because I work in the psychological field, I've been a counsellor for over 25 years. I was a nurse midwife before that.
So this added a great deal to your
credibility, and I think that's enormously important. It obviously doesn't have within the media anyway, and within the general populace, if you've got no credentials that are respected in society, then you're less likely to be listened to. I think if I was just, and I'm not saying this derogatory because I was a housewife quite happily for 20 years, bringing up my kids, but if I'd just been the housewife saying this, I doubt very much I would have had the same audience, if you like, or the credibility that was built on because of my background.
But then that's at the same time a lot to lose if they
For sure.
don't respond in a positive way.
In fact, it was a big thing when I finally became more public and created ACERN. I realized that the only way people were going to find me was by doing interviews. But I also meant that my colleagues, I was working in a Catholic counselling agency in Perth prior to becoming involved in this and in going into private practice. So in terms of that, I had lots of colleagues that were clinical psychs, a lot of my colleagues within the therapeutic arena, and I thought, well, as soon as they find out Mary's into UFOs, how are they going to react to that? Because I had a lot of credibility as a professional counsellor. But there comes a point, you know, that I ask a lot of experiences, until you own this, till this becomes part of what you accept within yourself, you're never going to heal. Because while you're constantly fighting with the third dimensional box you're programmed into, and this extraordinary multidimensional box that you're experiencing, and unless you can start to own the fact it doesn't fit anymore with that, and you can start to integrate the two, you'll never heal. But that also means owning it, even if you're owning it to your own family or to those that at least are receptive to it. So in a way, I couldn't ask them to do what I was not prepared to do, and that was part of my work now. So am I going to It's all about speak your truth. It's about, walking your talk. Was I going to walk my talk? Because I was asking my clients to do that. So I can't ask them to do something I'm not prepared to do for myself. So yes, I could lose my credibility. Everything I'd worked for as a professional person, maybe friends, whatever. But at the end of the day, there comes a point in your life where you have to make a choice about whether you're going to be congruent with integrity or not. And I think all of us ultimately have to do that. Are we going to be truly ourselves, honour our truth, or are we always going to go around in masks where nobody ever knows you and never knows really who you are? So in the end, it's now or never. I'm going to do it now because it's right and it's time, and I can't ask my clients to do what I'm not prepared to do for myself.
What are your conclusions? What kind of things is most significant that you think has happened?
Well, first of all, when I first came into this, the stories I were hearing were mostly the standard Whitley Strieber classic, I call them, abduction experience, which is all the stuff that you get on TV. Let's make this as scary and as fear-based as you possibly can, and traumatizing. And for a while, that seemed to be what it was suggesting to me. And after all, if it's trauma, I'm there to help someone through that. But what I discovered was that is such a small part of this amazing encounter and contact experience, and that is literally maybe 10-20% of the 100% that were coming to me ultimately. Ones that were coming with me with none of that fear. In fact, their fear was more about humans, and it was the fact that I don't feel I even belong here. Humans seem alien to me. I don't even feel like the same as my family. My family, I think, is out there, and I'm here and I feel I've got something to do, but I don't know why. And to be honest, I'd rather not be here anyway. So I'm getting some saying the aliens are weird and strange and I'm scared and they take me. But on the other hand, I've got some people saying human beings are strange. I really would rather not be here. Is it the same? Is it different? What does this mean? All these things, the more data I was getting was, and what people don't believe is, for many people, this is a conscious experience. And for these other ones, a lot of it was conscious in terms of, remembering going on spaceships, remembering the beings, remember being taught there. And a young lady I talk about, Tracy Taylor, she remembers talking about and going on spaceships at 5 years old. And what she couldn't understand was when she was talking about it to kids at school, they'd all laugh at her because she thought everybody had that experience. She learned very quickly to keep quiet. In fact, she said to me that she ultimately didn't say very much at all and more or less dumbed herself down, so that she actually even started to be considered less than average, and in fact, although she's highly intelligent. But this is what a lot of what I call the new human or the star children do. And they are having encounters, but they're having it in a different way. Not everyone gets traumatized, as I say. And I think there's an important reason why some may and some may not. And this goes into a bigger picture, which I call the journey, the life journey. But the bottom line was that these individuals were manifesting rather unusual evidence of their experience, and that may be they find themselves writing strange scripts. They may start coming out with languages that are more fluent to them and more comfortable to them and more natural to them than their own native tongue. And these languages, they may speak 5, 10 languages or 12 or whatever. Sometimes they said the languages they would speak during healing that they seem to know how to naturally do. Energy work, naturally part of their experience. Some did complex geometric drawings, which they would do literally without any thought. In fact, Tracy describes some of her 10-minute drawings, as she calls them, which lines more straighter than you draw with a ruler, all fitting together on transparencies. Other ones in colour, where she'd do them within a number of hours, and everything was spontaneous. She'd say she'd distract herself by looking somewhere else or talking on the telephone, but her hand would just be doing it. She knew she must have no input. It was very important that she just allowed, if she tried, her hand would stop. So there's a process not being in trance. Now I began to be very interested in, so this is evidence of something really strange going on here that was related to their extraterrestrial contact. downloads of information, people telling me, the farmer saying to me, you know, these lights that come, and he says, and look, I'm a farmer, but I know about quantum physics. Where did I get it from? What use is it to me, for heaven's sake? Why would I know this stuff? And other people saying to me, and Tracy as a child remembers having mathematics downloaded. In the end, she stopped putting it all down because what was the point? Who was going to make any sense of it? You know, and we're talking about advanced mathematics.
You've got people who've been have gone from childhood to adult.
They have learnt stuff on the craft and known it. And I had a gentleman, which I mentioned in my presentation yesterday, that wrote to me from Queensland. And he says he remembers the classes on the spaceship with physics. And he went to uni and he had no problem in fitting in with the classes and passing the exams, and he didn't have to study because in fact they couldn't work out how he found it so easy. He said in the end it couldn't be bothered anymore.
So the kind of mathematics and stuff that we're using would be similar to the mathematics he was taught?
Only he knew far more. Yeah. It was like basic stuff to him. But he said, you know, and he's not the only one. I'm getting stories upon stories of people being taught about cosmology and being taken and told to view black holes. And Whitley Strieber talks about this.
Do the ETs give any reason, any goal why they would need this information?
The understanding is that what we're taught on this planet with our third dimensional understanding is inaccurate. We are very limited in how we understand things. What they're, I believe, doing is giving us a far more truthful education, even in terms of the origin of the species, because they want us to understand the greater picture and our part in our cosmic family. And I believe that the reason for this is that there's come a point when they think we're ready and our psyche is ready to then show themselves in a very real way. That people say to me, why don't they show themselves, you know, in the White House and what have you? Because they'd be shot at, for God's sake. You know, they land, what's going to happen? The nukes will be out, the whole shenanigans, they know that.
Has been discussed in the day after the...
You know, exactly. So there's another way, and this is what this other way is. They are desensitizing this planet to the reality through consciousness. This is the way they're working, so that we, as a species, will have a point in our, when they think we're ready in our psyche, where we are prepared, at least on another level, because not all of us will remember our encounters, and that's deliberate, because at the moment, I think for many of us, if we recalled everything that happens on the craft, when many people are taught how to use their minds, taught how to manipulate matter, know about space-time, all this stuff, if we're trying to manage a third-dimensional reality with a multi-dimensional reality of that complexity, how could we even function? How could we even think of trying to do mundane things with that kind of understanding? So it's like, you know, reincarnation. If we remembered all our lifetimes, how on earth could we do the normal things on this planet? We wouldn't be bothered for a start. We'd say, why bother? Well, I've been here, done that, all before. There's no learning. So I believe there are sleepers, those on this planet that are being prepared for a time when the awakening, and each individual soul, it will be different depending on their role. For some people, their role has been for now, so they already have been woken up. They already know the reality. They're already having tangible physical experiences as well as multidimensional ones that have a role to play in preparing the rest of the species for the time when they are woken up too. Because the psyche and the way the general populace is going to react initially is going to be hugely traumatic. Hugely, no matter how we can intellectualize the fact that the reality is that 78% I can believe there's intelligent life out there. That's an intellectual concept that most of us, I think, who are intelligent can get. But it's one thing knowing that. It's another seeing a being walking in the lounge room and saying, how do you do? So they're going to need people that will, if you like, midwife. It's funny that I was a midwife. That will midwife that, will midwife this new reality and be there to provide what is needed for those to assist them with that transition into their multidimensional awareness and this reality.
What about the military abductions? Is there some fairly sinister undertones about the military and how they're taking people who've experienced these higher states.
Yes.
Is there any evidence of that in Australia, or what do you feel about that subject in general?
I think it's a very vital subject to know about with anyone who's working in this field, because if we're to understand what's going on and support people with experiences, we have to understand it all. The really dark stuff, much as most of us would rather not believe man's inhumanity to man, which is what this is. At the end of the day, we have to accept that the dark stuff is there. Because how can I help someone if that's part of their experience, if I as a researcher, are in denial of it? And there are many researchers, believe me, that have them on their files that say they haven't. They don't want to go there. And there's a number of high-level researchers that should know better. Because what they're doing is they are literally falling into what exactly these covered-ups want them to do, and to fall into fear. It may be fear, it may be that they feel they'll be targeted or whatever. But how can we ask the experiencer to own and be themselves in terms of owning what's going on for them, including this, and take the risks and the trauma that involves if we are not prepared to go with them on that journey? I do not get so many, at least at the moment anyway, that seem to have that adjunct to their experience, as I seem to be aware in America and the UK. It may be that there's a smaller population, therefore I certainly think there's bases there. I have met some experiences, a joint experience with some in Sydney that went to the Blue Mountains, where there was a suggestion of my lab there, and they all experienced something that was similar to that. But there was also a suggestion that the being that was with them was not allowing them to be harmed, even though it was there were humans there in the white coats. The being was very much saying, you will not harm these people, but we will allow you to get some understanding in what you are researching with this. So it was, and I don't know whether that is totally correct or whether their each perceptions were correct, but it's interesting in that case, the one they trusted was the ET, not the humans. In fact, they were very fearful of the humans.
So there's a sort of a war on consciousness where there's ETs are elevating a consciousness,
yes,
but there seems to be a group that doesn't want that to happen.
I believe that there is certain members of our species that are very much relying on the status quo on this planet, because that's where their power base is. Whether it's money, all those things, and the power base with oil and gas, with all the technology or whatever, that allows them to control the rest of us and to do basically what they want. Of course, they're not going to want to change the status quo and elevate us to, and allow us to be elevated to our true potential, because they will lose all of that. And, they're not going to want that.
So obviously that leads us to disclosure. So
yes.
Do you think the whole disclosure argument is just a waste of time?
What I'm understanding too, that because these intelligences are targeting consciousness, they're also aware that those within those covert groups, some of them at least, can be touched by perhaps their own encounters, their own understanding of a higher purpose. And I suspect some of them may wake up to the reality that there's a part of them that is part of these advanced intelligences. So may ultimately, through a wave of wanting to change this, even though they've got themselves fairly deep, may actually want now to change that too. So it could be there's a warring within the covert agencies, because a lot of the whistleblowers, as you and I know, have said they've been fed information from people that know, that can't do it themselves, but want the people to know. So I think there's probably certainly a percentage of that now that are saying, yes, we do want people to know now, and that's why the whistleblowers and others are starting to feed the information into the community. The trouble is, we're still very distrustful of it because of the many layers of lies and deceit over so many years.
So where do you think you're moving forward? What do you see ACERN and your work taking you to in the future?
Surprisingly for me, as a very quiet natured lady, which nobody would believe now because I do a lot of public speaking on this, is that what I never expected when I got into this was how important it was to inform the public, because there are millions upon millions of people out there that I believe are having these experiences, have no idea what it is, and just think they're strange and weird, many of them perhaps thinking they're crazy, and feel isolated, confused, and frightened. So the only way to reach them is not preaching to the converted, the ones that already know, the ones that have already woken up, much as that's still important to share, and to share with others. I believe the role has to be now to present this phenomena in a credible way that people can understand. And so more and more I have been working with the media, including some of those that I felt would treat this with integrity. And I have contacts now within the media. And one of the first things that I've needed to do is educate the media. So those in Perth, a lot of them know me now. If they've come to interview me, the first thing I do is show them the reality of this, the evidence that they can't deny. Many of them discover they're already, they've had experiences. So it's amazing how there's a turnaround from, okay, let's see what fun we can have with this, to, oh my goodness, this could even be me. Oh my goodness, maybe I ought to be really careful how I handle this subject. So I've got people now, certainly in Perth, that are prepared to do credible documentaries, any kinds of short pieces on this, and they're coming over very credibly to people. And I think this is the way to go. It's documentaries, it's any kind of information we can put out in a credible way that this is a reality, and I've become more and more focused in actually doing that. Even though the majority of my work is still working with clients and experiences, I'm writing my second book, The New Human, which is again another way of reaching out to reach the people that need to know they're okay, they're normal, and this is part of where we're going.
What about other social, scientific groups abroad?
Yeah.
Have you been trying to liaise with them?
Well, as much as they are in contact with me. I mean, I have spoken at a number of universities. Hong Kong University was the last one. Interesting, there was some controversy there from the science department, who initially the university had started a six-level course on this, and I was invited over by Hong Kong University to do the presentation on, on the reality of contact. There was a lot of politics ultimately with that, and for the first lecture, the science department had the auditorium closed. They said that they hadn't sanctioned it, and there was an enormous amount of politics going on. In the end, I was still allowed to speak. They paid for my airfare, they paid for my everything else, but I came under the umbrella of the UFO group there. So that was the only way they could circumvent the science department, and it's still going on now. So there's an awful lot still of censorship. I have spoken at Oxford University in a forum, the reality of is there intelligent life out there, with the head of astrophysics at Manchester University and a founder of the British Interplanetary Society, giving their perspectives. Their perspectives was the likelihood wasn't very high. Interestingly, though, despite the fact I was talking about experiences and their experiences, and a little bit of the genetic evidence, a little bit of the evidence from our history and mythology, I ended up winning the forum, which was actually quite heartening.
Well done.
Thank you.
So, your new book, anything you want to say about that?
My new book is actually a sequel to Awakening, which is a resource book for people waking up to their experience, helping to understand such things as, is it real? How do I handle it? Implants, missing pregnancies, all of the things that Naira was talking about are ways of understanding it. Also the expressions of contact, which are all these strange drawings that they are impelled to do, scripts and writing languages, all those things are discussed in that book. But The New Human is going into more of the star kids, Homo noeticus, I call it, the higher human or the advanced human, and all the stories that substantiate that, case studies. Some are just telling their stories about how they understand their part in the planetary changes and what have you. So it really covers a far broader aspect of encounters and contact, right through some that we would call walk-ins. These are someone, and one lady, a beautiful lady in her 60s, that remembers coming in a cylindrical craft and tall being, telepathic, and being put into a 3-year-old physical female body, and not at first handling the trauma of that and having to learn how to speak because she was telepathic on the craft, and actually learning how to eat because she didn't need to. For her, this was highly traumatic, and she describes what it was like to find herself in a physical human body, and she calls herself an undercover agent. She knows no one will ever know who she is. She never talks about it at all, but she knows she's here undercover. And believe me, I don't think she's the only one. I think many humans walking around at the moment are undercover agents of one kind or another, and they will look as human as you or I, but they're here to help with the shift of the planet. They don't need to do the UFO yet landing on the planet. They're doing it a far more subtle way and
so
a way.
They're conscious of the fact that
Some of them are. Some of them are absolutely conscious. They have come into human form to help and assist this planet to shift into this new consciousness. And they may be your doctor, they may be your nurse, they may be a midwife who tells me, you know, she's a star kid and she's here to midwife the new star kids, but we'll never discuss it in a hospital, obviously. And I think they're all over the planet. So they're doing what they need to do to help us move forward. And I think I'm doing what I'm meant to do, which is to give, hopefully, some peace and support to those on this planet that need to know this information so they can start integrating who they really are and to become fully human. Well, obviously it depends on which country they're in. There are obviously, you would want more local people to start with. Someone who's feeling like that, if they want to contact me first and I can head them in the right direction. I have contacts in the UK and the US and a number of other countries. Sadly, there are UFO groups that are not in the least supportive of those with experiences. They're quite happy learning about the lights in the sky and how long you saw them and what they look like, but for goodness sake, don't say that you're having encounter experiences with those intelligences, because somehow or other, for many people, that becomes too real. And this is what happens with a lot of UFO groups. They're fine as long as you're talking about UFOs, but have not the skills, I think. That's part of the problem, or the understanding of the encounter side of it. So sometimes it's just that they don't know enough, or they're scared of it and it's a bit too real. So
how does a person who's contacted, how do they know that they've got the right people?
Well, depending on their reaction, but what they can do is that there's lots of resources on the internet. Certainly they can always contact me, but there are other organizations worldwide that specialize in encounter experiences, and that's what they can type in or whatever. And that's a good start so that you get to find out someone close by that may be supportive of that. And there's a number, I'm hoping to start Concern UK again with a psychotherapist over there that's highly trained and creating a network in the UK. Obviously, for me, I've got enough resources and referrals in Australia. And there's an asset in America, of course, has a network of therapists that will offer their support if they get in touch with asset itself. So there are, and peer.
Can you just simply say who they are, where to contact them?
Well, obviously for myself, okay, my own website is ACERN, which is www.acern.com.au, and I can always be a initial referral source. Concern UK hasn't got a network yet, so they're going to have to wait for that, but I can head them to various people there that can be supportive. And the Academy of Clinical Close Encounter Therapists, Barbara Lamb, for example, I'm not sure what her website is. She's also works with crop circles, so she's another very good resource and works for ASSET as well. So she would be a good resource for here, but there are many, many others. I can't go into all the different names. All I would like to say is if you've got experiences, no matter how strange and weird you think they are, at the end of the day you may be surprised to find there's not only one or two, but there may be many, 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 many others that are having exactly the same experience as you. Don't be frightened to contact someone. Don't be frightened to at least put out a hand, because you may find that by doing that you start to finally connect with others and start to feel normal and actually get your life together in a new way. It may be a very new way, but it's going to make a lot more sense than the one that you're living now.
The Amash Project.
So, welcome to part 3 of the Mary Rodwell interview, and 2 years later, in fact. So, Mary, what happened soon after that original interview way back at the Laughlin conference? You appeared in a TV program, and what do you feel about the whole experience, especially since it was a close colleague, friend, relative, your son?
So incredible.
So that was a bundle of laughs. I think it was one of the best concepts ever, you know. Because you have to live with each other after the show.
So in that sense, yeah, obviously.
Well, to be honest, Miles, the thing was that it was because he knew the producer, because he worked on the pet show, and he's a veterinary surgeon, that he knew at least it would be treated fairly respectfully. We both made an agreement that we wouldn't fall out over it.
Oh, very adult. Wow. No, I mean, seriously, that's the kind of thing could go wrong. But I'm sure it would never.
Look, we have lots of love and respect for one another, and although he still struggles with my interests in the sense that he still isn't that interested, to be honest, and he promised me after we'd done the documentary that I never speak about UFOs again, which was because he was over it. It actually was really good for us, for him to see a little bit more about what my work involved. And that is something that he'd never really obviously been aware of, because I didn't talk about it. The thing that I've learnt with this passion and enthusiasm of mine is that if someone's interested, then that's great. If they're not interested, then there's no point in shoving it down their throats. And with my children, I've been very respectful of that. If they show an interest, that's fine. If they don't, well, that's also fine. It was directly after a 10-week round the world trip, so I was pretty shattered. I only had one night in my bed before the film crew arrived.
Crikey, I mean, even with jet lag and everything, that's a big... And
it was huge. And I made them promise that I got my hair done beforehand.
Well, that's the most important thing. Alien invasions at 11 o'clock, hair done at 10.
Look, I wish I'd had more time to prepare and wasn't so tired, but I just kept going with it and trusted, like you have to, that ultimately what came out was going to be at least positive for people watching it. And my main reason for doing it isn't about me, it's about the information. And the bottom line is that so many people contact me, hundreds of emails afterwards showed that this had meaning for them, because it showed them there was someone there that could help, that would listen and wouldn't think they were crazy. And that was the primary thing. It wasn't about whether Mary looked good or bad. It was more about the information. Look, there's some resource here. And that was what I went with. So with some of the things I didn't like, and there were a number of things where the commentator was suggesting that my son might think his mum's losing the plot, I was quite upset about, because Chris has never ever suggested I'm losing the plot. He might think my ideas are unusual, but in terms of losing the plot, he's never ever suggested that. And I gave the producer a bit of a serve over that, because it wasn't true.
God help him. But I think it is a convenient way where those who wish to keep this subject in the outer Hebrides, in the outer reaches, to just say, oh, so-and-so's loopy. It is a challenge, but in science, so-called peer review has been pretty nasty over the centuries.
Well, this is the bottom line was for me was that really what Christopher did get was the interviews that we did with Greg and that we did with Peter Curry. He honestly couldn't help but believe them. He said to me, look, Mum, I believe them. Even though their story is way out of my belief system, he couldn't deny the integrity of the two people that we actually interviewed. And that's what really is very, very powerful for someone who doesn't know anything about this to hear this incredible story from two people. And let's face it, Peter Curry's story about the alien hair in itself is really, almost in the realms of science fiction. But Chris said, I couldn't help but believe him. And of course, when they did the polygraph and showed that he was speaking his truth, that was another confirmation. But it just shows you, doesn't it, that no matter what the proof is out there, that people still struggle with a paradigm that stretches their own. And it takes a lot more than that for them to come to terms with its reality.
Is that not the actual key to this whole problem? It's not whether there are aliens or interdimensional beings or other beings from this world, that world, or any other world. It's the destruction or the fracturing of people's own personal paradigm. That's the problem.
That, I think, is the crucial point in here. I recently worked with a scientist, a geneticist, who came to see me. He'd actually seen beings with his father, in his bedroom with his wife. His father and him had seen UFOs. They still really struggled. He struggled when he came to see me, saying, look, I'm a scientist. If I take this on board, I've got to let go of everything I've ever believed, and I've got to start again. And I said, yeah. That's the deal. I said, and I've had to do it as a researcher, and those that see craft and see beings have to do the same. And to let go of everything you've ever believed and start again is bloody scary.
Well, this is the problem, belief. Is it a religion or I mean, how do we quantify what we exist in? Something I'm interested in is the so-called holographic universe. There seems to be a complete paradigm shift in the way science is looking at what we are.
Well, I think what I've needed to do, and I'm sure you've had to do it too, Miles, is you have to look at the latest in scientific discoveries, where we're talking about quantum mechanics, we're talking about string theory, we're talking about dimensions. And when you can start accepting that science is exploring things that these people are experiencing, then you can sort of make more sense of it. So, like yourself, I've had to look at where is the tangible evidence from science, from DNA, from anthropology, archaeology, from, a broader sense of how we look at what we've been taught. And then you can start marrying what these people are experiencing with that. And so, ancient astronaut, the gods, the DNA evidence has been really important for me. And I've got now from credible scientists information about the changes in DNA, for example. Dr. William Brown in Hawaii has actually qualified the fact that our DNA is changing. And I've got an amazing quote from him that I can share, with you, where it qualifies what an experiencer was telling me 10 years ago about the changes in DNA for the new human. And to have that now qualified by a scientist, a geneticist, that's saying, yes, this is what I believe is going on as well. That's when people can start saying, well, if scientists are now saying this, at least the more forward-thinking, more open-minded scientists, then maybe I can take this on board and start to put this into a bigger paradigm that is not the same as the old one. And this is what I do with my presentations. I try and present not just the experiencer information, but qualifying it with the latest of science so that I can say, look, you can believe it because science is now telling us that this is also possible. And that's the only way we can take it on board, really, isn't it?
Yes, but what is the change? What changes have they noticed? I mean, this is fantastic news.
Well, let me just read to you what Tracy Taylor told me 10 years ago. There's a race of beings on this planet, increasing in number, visually and physically no different to most humans, and they're here to guide the awakening terrestrial consciousness. Now listen to what she says. The conscious awareness of these new children can override dominant conditioning and programming, which occurs from birth. Superior mental and analytical capabilities linked directly to the subconscious and superconscious, with an innate connection to the universe, balanced by spiritual understanding. The enhanced DNA has 10 times the amount of information. Everything is accelerated. They can recognize foreign organisms and turn them into nutrients and enhance bodily functions. Evidence of such profound changes I have found is suggested by research in the Medical Center of the University of California in Los Angeles. It appears that some young children exhibit unique patterning in their DNA. 24 active codons, normally only 20 are active in most humans. And these children, they found, show remarkable resistance to disease and seem to be immune to everything. Now listen, this is what Dr. William Brown, a molecular biologist in Hawaii, did a statement for me and said that I can share it. I believe that genetic modification is occurring right now in utero and is actually producing a new human. The hybrids are altogether a new species of human. This is shown by the exponential increase in autistic, ADD, and indigo children. The new genetic architecture allows them to see the world in a multidimensional fashion. I believe research would show dormant genetic regions are being integrated into the biological system. And this is occurring in all of us to produce expanded awareness. Their brains are working faster and they have access to more information. In the classroom, learning is much faster than normal. I believe they already know what is being taught. And he finishes off by saying, they have an intrinsic understanding of certain knowledge and information which goes down to biomolecular level, where sentient activity of the brain actually takes place in the atomic structure of the DNA molecules. It's transgenerational information. The information is encoded within the atomic structure of the DNA molecule. It can be accessed with greater efficiency and produce savant-like characteristics. The modification of the DNA is more the remodeling of the genome to make dormant regions accessible again. So that is a statement from a molecular biologist that is qualifying exactly what Tracy Taylor told me 10 years ago, an experiencer that understood the changes from her contacts.
This is absolutely amazing material. Now, one of the things that started at the introduction to your interview was that you set up this resource centre and facility in Australia, ACERN?
ACERN, yes.
Yeah. But what's happened since then is that a lovely friend of mine called Joanne Summerscales has come along and set up the AMASH project, a similar resource, although we're really just sort of starting off here. One of the people that we've interviewed is a gentleman, a young man who has said something very similar to what you've just said in terms of a new genome, a new species of human is being created. But he referenced that at the molecular level with some kind of intelligent, sentient, goo, some kind of something that's coming from the earth itself. Okay, Alistair, we're now on to this second diagram. Now, could you explain this in detail?
Yeah, the thing is, they are dumbing us down with chemicals, but that's like the main population, the masses, basically.
So what's the purpose of that? Ultimately, it would appear that they want to control the masses and reduce them. Or do we need the mass population anymore?
They would like to depopulate us to make us easier to control, and also to have more resources, available to the people, the elite.
Have you had any kind of references to anything like that in Australia or in any other of your work?
I haven't I've heard about this intelligent goo. I don't actually know anything other than what I've heard from David. He did an interview, I think you did with him, yes, regarding that kind of thing. I am fascinated by it, but that hasn't tied into any of my research at the moment. But one of the things... Yeah.
So it seems that the sentience at a molecular level and the changing of the DNA, I mean, the statement you read out seems that is the so-called junk DNA that we have actively changing. This isn't a generational thing, is it, or is it both generational and actual living humans today are changing? Is that what's happening?
I think that it's happening to us as a species, although there are some what I call upgrades, and those are the new ones coming in.
Now, could you say that again? We had a little bit of a drawback on the Skype.
Is, I think it is both generational in the sense that we are being upgraded, but the new humans, I think, are the children that are coming in at the moment with less programs, but we are also, the older models are benefiting from that as well, as consciousness itself is opening up.
So this is what I think is so important about one of the other things that we did very recently with Dr. Judy Wood on 9/11, is that the real target of the 9/11 thing isn't all this security stuff that's exploded all over the world where we have to be checked up with, but actually they were trying to affect consciousness or try to stagger or stop or hold back consciousness. What do you feel about that?
Well, I'll actually quote a 9-year-old girl in Northern Europe. And she said that there's 5 like her in the school. And she said what happens in schools is they program you out of your light and your knowledge.
Yes.
And she said this is deliberate. She explains that she is here to help her family wake up. And she also says that she's here to heal water. And by that, she speaks a frequency to water, and it changes the molecular state of water and purifies it. And she said that what happens is that she's been given information to help her with this whole awakening of humanity, not only her own family, but also many like her are here now to assist in that. But she said it is deliberate in schools to program you, she said, like computers. And it really is quite fascinating what she's actually saying. One of the things she tells me, and I'll read this to you because I want to get it correct. She has helpers who guide and teach her. One is called Moki, and it is a female blue being with no hair or ears. Her eyes are like human eyes. The green being is male. She said these are from the dayland, which she talks about dimensions. She even says that we all originate from dayland. She doesn't want to use the word God, as she says it's misused. She is calling it a being in dayland, an over-terrestrial, where we all originate. It is not a man or a woman. It has no gender. The being sowed the seed of light and love only. That is where the light and angels live. Now, she was given access to 7 books, but they're not really books, but they have information. And she said, the red book is about creation and our origins. The brown one is about planets and life there. The light green one is about nature and how we can make contact with plants and animals and how to understand nature. The dark green one is about the body and how it really works and how we get to evolve. The blue book is about light and truth. The red-brown book she can't open yet because she says a dragon took the key from her sometimes in the 1700s. The black book is about darkness and evil. All the books contain important information. The black book is dangerous. It shows us about evil, she said.
Now,
But
could you
she's
just
explained
could you
how
repeat
we've
that
been
about the
held
black
back.
book? Because we
Yeah.
lost that on the Skype.
Okay. The last book is a black book, and it is about darkness and evil. And she said the black book is dangerous. So she also mentioned that she's aware that there are intelligences, and interestingly, she seemed to understand the same material as David Icke regarding there are beings that are trying to also work with some humans to limit and close down these new children.
Somebody I interviewed, Chris Thomas, was aware of this first wave, and they'd actually done a soul contract, or they'd chosen to be the first wave, knowing they would be potentially taken like that. Have you experienced that?
What she's saying is that they look for these children. They particularly and are doing their best as much as possible to influence them, to shut them down. And this is something that she's very aware of. And she said that it's happening in all the educational systems, that there is those that wish to limit them, to shut them down. And my feeling is, sorry.
Is this in Western Europe or the English
Europe.
the English world, English speaking world, with its very regressive medicines and chemical medicines? But are there other countries which are allowing it to happen?
She implies this is globally. She lives in Northern Europe, and she's very, very careful when I speak to her via an interpreter that I don't give any indication of her identity. Remember, this is a 9-year-old girl aware of how dangerous it is to be identified with what she's saying. 9, and aware of it already.
This is important because we had one of our first interviews, which we had to pull the interview, was because the mother admitted that she'd met extraterrestrial beings, extra-dimensional beings, and she had a wonderfully telepathic and extremely empathic relationship with her daughter, who was communicating telepathically and psychically with an extremely high level of command of intelligence, and they took the daughter away. That's such a terrible thing to happen, and it's happening so much. But it seems to be a key that they do not want humans waking up. So we got to wake them up. What do you feel our role is in trying to wake others up, or trying to get others who are woken up together, or to notify them?
I think that what you're doing is extremely important, and why I do so many interviews is the more this information gets out, the more those with these children can feel there's someone to connect to. I get emails from all over the world with parents with these children. This lady mother is a linguist. She's a teacher who found out about my presentation via someone else, and let's face it, this is not an English-speaking woman. She contacted me because her daughter speaks 3-star languages, and said, my daughter listened to your presentation with the languages and said, that lady knows what I'm speaking about. And that's how they contacted me from Northern Europe. I mean, it's incredible how the internet is allowing for this connection. I get emails from people with children in America, South America, Japan, all over the world, saying, they've seen something about either my work or someone like mine, and saying, my children are doing this. They are telepathic. One young man is in England that I spoke to, and he's 10, and he went to the school and he said to them, you are not teaching correctly. You are teaching in a linear way, and I think in spirals. He told me that he was given information at 7 or 8 years old to create technology, to create portals.
Now, where are those portals coming and going from?
Well, he actually describes that he comes through a portal through the sun. And his father also says the same. But he said that he has been given information, if you like a download of how to create the electronics or technology to create portals as well. So these are he was 7 or 8 when he was given this information. He said that he actually acts, his body is like, it creates a kind of alchemy when he's around people. He actually changes their energy by just being around them.
I've experienced that. I've experienced where the person concerned didn't necessarily consciously be aware of her psychic and abilities and so forth, but her presence engineered a massive catalytic change. It rapidly accelerated progress in certain areas, especially with a series of people I would call bounce backs. That's to say, people who have had some kind of accident or tragedy in their lives where they would have died, but something has brought them back for some kind of central mission. Have you had any further experiences of things like that, particularly with the children?
Oh, look, certainly I've heard hundreds of accounts now of people, not only with the children, but other adults that have been in mortal danger in some way and somehow have been protected. And they've said, I don't know how I survived. Literally, it was impossible for them to have survived a particular accident or whatever. And there's no doubt that if you're important to these intelligences, they will look after you. There is no question in my mind this happens. And also, a lot of these children have these guides and helpers. And it was interesting, this young girl told me her brother, who's only a toddler, the mother sent me video of this little toddler with a blue orb following the little toddler.
Wonderful.
And the daughter said to me that her little brother is protected by the blue orb, and that once he fell down the stairs and he fell down in slow motion because the blue orb was protecting him from harm.
Fantastic. That is absolutely brilliant. What about these intelligences? What about the concept of guides and people who would accompany you? Or I know a number of people who say my spirit guide says this, or my so and so says this. How does that work? And how does a person know or maybe welcome a guide or recognize a guide?
Well, some people feel the energy or get a sense of them anyway. I think most of us can tap into that. I don't think this is particular to any person. Some are just more accepting of what they're experiencing, for example. But I believe we all have guides. But what is interesting with some people, the guides are not necessarily human. Many of those that have come to me have told me about a guide that's a blue being or an energy being or a reptilian. Or, because I've been told that sometimes, the reptilians get a bad press. There are apparently, from one lady, she told me that 2 species of reptilian are benevolent. There's one that isn't. I've been told, how the greys get a bad rap. That's 165 species of grey. So when you say the greys, it's almost like picking a human being and saying every human's like that human being. We've got to be really careful about how we're interpreting the accounts, because it is vast, and we are looking through the eye of a needle and thinking we can make sense of it when we are looking at a dimensional as well as a physical reality here. Dimensional, interdimensional, ultradimensional, whatever. We're looking at a matrix of reality, and we are trying through our tiny human understanding to get a sense of it. So all we can do is collate the data rather than try and make, some mandate, because as soon as you do that, you've lost the plot.
Yeah, I think it's very important that we don't draw too many conclusions to things which are too early on in putting this jigsaw together. You mentioned 165 types of greys. What is the current status of the so-called ET or extra-dimensional category of beings? You mentioned, are there any new types? What's the general status right now?
All I can do is tell you of the clients and the beings that they are seeing. Many times it's humanoid. Crystalline beings are another one. There's,
what's a crystalline being? Is that like this? This is one we made earlier. But are we talking about crystals and rocks and things?
We're talking about a being that is in a form that looks almost geometric. And these are just a different intelligence, a different life form that some people connect to. They are often taken astrally to their planet of origin, which may very well be crystalline in nature. And they will see themselves as also one of those types of beings. We've got obviously, light beings are another one that are very, very common. Energy beings, many different names. Each person interprets them in a different way. You've got many it almost suggests that anything we can imagine can have a form or can have an intelligence, no matter what it is. And this is what the children are telling me, not only those that communicate with animals, and I've got a little 8-year-old here locally that communicates with animals. He talks about going on board the craft with 2 of his school friends. They've got the same energy as him. Once a year, he finds himself in a tube where he can't move, and blue beings are doing his yearly medical exam, he tells me. He also talks about being taught mathematics, learning about black holes and cosmology with a number of humans and sometimes ETs and hybrids on the craft. He also talks about sometimes moving from his human physical body into the mantid form.
Now, that's very interesting because of the Simon Park Samash story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And he says, I said to him, what does it feel like? And he says, well, it feels a bit strange, but he didn't seem confronted by it. And interestingly, Simon may have told you, one of the unique details this little boy told me was he started to make a chirping kind of noise. Yeah. And his mother said, oh, he's copying the birds. And I looked at him and I said, it isn't, is it? And he said, no, that's the sound the mantid make, this chirping, trilling sound. When I spoke to Simon, Simon told me that when he hears that, he said they're usually very happy with him and they hold him above their head in almost like a song. I went back to the little boy and I said, when do you hear the trilling sound? And he said, he said, when they're happy with me and hold me above their head. It identical to the way Simon had described it. Now, this is an 8-year-old boy and a 52-year-old man in different hemispheres that have never spoken to one another.
It's interesting that in the island of La Gomera, in the middle of the Atlantic, that the native language, that's those who weren't wiped out by the Spanish, their native language is birdsong. It sounds like whistling birdsong. So maybe our ancestors got the language, or from that period.
What's fascinating is that he talks about his mantid mother, and it's his ancestry, and he actually gets really emotional, this little 8-year-old, when he talks about going back to his mantid origins and his mantid ancestor. And he talks about the purple cloak that they have around them, the purple energy, identical to Simon. His understanding of their wisdom and their awareness. And I remember the most poignant part of this was when he was talking to me and he said to me, so you mean I'm not crazy? And I said, no, you're not crazy. But this is an 8-year-old questioning his sanity because he knows that it's outside everybody else's reality. And this is what we have to start listening to these children and what they're saying. The other thing that was amazing for me, and I'll show you now, that he looked at the picture in my room and told me that he recognized a planet in it. And he said, but the planet is bigger. He said, it's actually bigger than you've got in your picture. So I asked him to describe to me what this was, this image that I've got in this picture. And he said, those are pathways into technology that takes you into other worlds, other galaxies, other universes. And he said, and that's where I've been because they seed other planets. And he even described some of the technologies, like on the picture, he said, they're artificial portals. And he said they send technology through those. And he even mentioned a universe where everything in it is geometric in form, but is an artificial planet, such as pyramidal shapes, hexagons, etc. And he said, and they're artificial in nature, and they are created by these beings. And this is in one of the dimensions. Now, this is an 8-year-old we're talking about.
Yes, this is fascinating.
Black holes, portals, galaxies, universes, and this is the picture, and the picture's right directly in front of me, right behind me now.
That is fantastic. And that's a beautiful painting. I mean, who painted it, or how was it made?
Well, the interesting synchronicity with that was I was given it, and the artist is all it's got is unknown. And it's actually got a title. I'd need to get up and remember the title. But what is fascinating for me is that a number of experiences have come in my room, looked at that. One of them, Greg, who lives locally, said, Mary, it's a Stargate. It's a portal into other universes. He said, I've been through one like that when I was on a craft 32 miles long. And he said, they told me they seeded other planets. And this, he said, is actually a Stargate. So I'm getting the same information from different people that are recognizing something in this picture. And I believe whoever made this picture was an experiencer and it actually was creating something. It was in 1987 it was actually made, and I was given it.
Now that's interesting because Eva Zebanova in Prague, she refers to the complex space-time fields that where we are in Earth, the region of space that we are here, and compares it to the Mandela. The Mandela, I hope I'm saying that correct, where you have a series of convoluted things like that, which refer to gateways within a convoluted triple space-time or time-space series of fields. So the idea that you just sort of get in your spaceship and go straight ahead, warp factor 10, doesn't work. You've got to work your way through these infolding zones like a key.
What this little 8-year-old told me, and I'll call him Paul because he wanted to be called Paul because after the movie,
oh great,
which he thought was hilarious.
That's important. We'd like to talk about maybe that next, about the modern version of ETs in film.
Well, what he told me was there are many portals on this planet, and that craft use them. He said a lot of them are triangular in shape. And he said, and the craft use them to go through to other dimensions. So our planet isn't just being used as a way station or a station for them, but there are actually portals that are created through technology into other dimensions through our planet. So we are also a kind of, we have abilities to go into these other dimensions as well. Some of them are artificial, some of them are not. This is what he told me.
This is interesting because John Irwin in 1957 refers to a set of keys, crystal keys, that they recovered while on operation in the Middle East, which gave you access to multiple portals and technology. And these were ancient pieces of technology which they wanted the good guys to have rather than the so-called bad guys, which I don't want to really go into, but because this whole thing that you're coming up with is absolutely fascinating new material. So continue.
What he did tell me was that the pyramids were built by the cat people. And he said that was to also show us that our origins came from these many, what we call the gods, and that these, particularly the pyramids, are an indicator of that. That, as I think you've heard before, other people have also said there's material hidden under the pyramids as well, information that's hidden there about our origins.
Is it hidden in our reality or hidden in a slightly displaced reality?
He didn't qualify, other than the fact that there is information held underneath both the pyramids and the Sphinx. That was how he understood it. And I've heard this from others that have had encounters tell me that there is a lot more to be found there. Whether some of it has already been found and we've not been told is quite possible. I don't know.
How do we make sure that the right kind of people get access to that? I mean, the evidence in Shakespeare that Shakespeare's works were encoded to keep certain information of that kind away from certain people. The Bosnian pyramid seems now to have been filled in from the outside in, so that they were trying to stop something that's on Earth from accessing that kind of technology. Are there any bad guys we should look out for? I mean, I didn't really want to talk about that, but it seems to be that that humanity does have a predator that not being aware of is a mistake?
Well, there's no doubt that we live in in a reality where we are experiencing the gamut of both the positive and negative in energies. And that's part of what I call the human journey, is that we're learning to explore both sides, the duality of this planet. And so, of course, there are those that have less than loving intent, is the way that I look at it.
That's a very diplomatic way of saying it.
The self-serving, and we live in a planet where most of our those that are in power are more self-serving than they are interested in serving humanity. We know that. But what is also changing is the awareness that whatever you do to somebody else comes back in a new way. And we're also now learning that that's happening faster and faster. Look at the uncovering of corruption now. Look at the way people are no longer tolerating this kind of thing, whereas at one time we were not aware of it, or we weren't ready to challenge it. Now we are challenging it. And a lot of these new children coming in are doing exactly that, but they're doing it in a more subtle way. They're working with energy in a more subtle way, and they are affecting us purely by their energy and by their awareness. So this is going right across the board. So we're not doing what we used to do, is getting the big hammer out and bashing people over the head anymore. We're working on an energetic level. Every time you put out frequencies that are helping humanity to wake up and to grow, you are actually doing what you need to do to change that cover-up, that blanket of disinformation and what have you. So we're doing it. We're already doing it. Every one of us that is bringing in this new understanding and what have you is acting as a new kind of spiritual warrior. And I believe that what we're being supported on many, many levels to do that. So we're understanding ourselves in the process. We're learning what we really want. And through that, we're transcending all these negative energies. So I don't actually worry about that, because we are changing things purely by what we're doing. And that's the message that I think is really important, because it can be really confronting. Look at all the things that were supposed to happen on the 21st of December, end of the world. I actually watched Deep Impact just to have my Armageddon fix, because it didn't happen. Everything else supposed to happen, the double suns, all these things. What happened to them? Nada. Absolutely nada, So this should be a lesson to everybody, Start, use your brain, use some logic,
Yes, exactly. Yes, and don't fall into the fear agenda. But I think this is fascinating. Have you done any new books, presentations, any new sort of things for people that they could get access to? Because these new cases, I don't think are in your existing work for people to see.
Well, I've written a couple of articles. One of them is Star Children Speak, and all of this is in that. And these are children 10 and under that I have spoken to either, physically, or I've been contacted by their parents and I've spoken to them through Skype. And this is some of the latest stuff with the children. I think they're the key.
Yes.
They're the ones that are going to... One of the things this young lady in Northern Europe said was that Mary has big ears, and her mother translated that by saying, because Mary listens and most adults don't. Yeah. What we've got to start doing now is listen to these kids, because they do know. They are showing us and telling us. So it's about that now. So in terms, I've got 2 books on the go. I've been so busy, more and more getting emails, phone calls. I'm doing sessions over Skype, believe it or not, even hypnosis. I've been doing to America and New Zealand, and it works, which is amazing to think technology can allow us to do that. So I've been so busy proactively that writing's been really hard. I've just done, as you know, the foreword for Simon Parkes. I've done one for Niara Isley. Those 2 are getting those. So I've been busy doing those kinds of things.
Yeah, Niara is wonderful.
Well, it's important.
And she was present actually during your first interview. Yes. Which I think was important, just to let the audience know.
Niara's become a great friend, and the thing was, she asked me to do the foreword because, again, what I've wanted to do is put energy into other people's stories, because they're the ones telling it as it is. So it's far more important as a priority for me to support their stories than to my other stuff. And articles have been a quick way of getting the information out. Books take too long, and that's why my books have gone on hold. I do a lot of interviews now, which again is important because it's getting the information out now rather in a year or 2 years' time. The time-intensive book has been why I haven't been so busy with that.
Yeah, things have clearly moved on in 2 years. I mean, it was wonderful to see Niara, who actually had she had a traumatic time. Do you want to blow your nose or something? It's not live.
Tissue. It's all right. I'm fine.
Great. No,
I've just got a tissue.
It was wonderful that you were with Niara at the time, because she had a traumatic time on behalf of her early experiences, which were quite frankly really shocking. And I think it's wonderful to see that somebody who's gone through such terrible experiences is enlightened and is able to get past that. And were you part of helping her recover from that?
Niara has done a lot of her own personal growth, and it is incredible how she's transcended the whole experiences that she had. I can't imagine how anyone can do that. I did do a session with her, which she found when I was in Nevada with her, which she asked me to do, which I'm sure she'll talk about at some point. But that happened to be a particularly profound one. She's connected to her star family now, and I think that's been incredibly helpful in terms of her understanding her mission on this planet. What I have discovered is many people here have incarnated from the star, our star ancestors. They've come in human form, in a human container, to act from a human star family perspective. So they feed back information to the star families, but at the same time they're working from the inside. And so we have many, many people on this planet that have a dual consciousness, that are part human, part star visitor. And they are here to assist with this transition of consciousness. We also have some...
Just a second. Could you just tilt the screen down a wee bit? Great, just center the shot. And okay, then we also have some...
We also, there are extraterrestrials amongst us. We know that. We know humanoid extraterrestrials are wandering around. They look like us, so there's no way that we're aware of them. So we do know that.
How do we know that? I always get a bit concerned about when we know that. How do we know that? Where does that data come from?
From people like Bob Dean talks about this, and he has already had access to military above top secret. So
I can confirm that. My sources in Northern Ireland and other places here in the UK certainly do mention that in great detail. We've been talking about the children as we're coming up to the end of our little session. Although we can continue, but. What about people who have gone through trauma? We've had some pretty dark stories from people who have been children. They've been taken as if the first sort of wave of these children have been heavily damaged in their and they're grown up into their adult lives. Niara is a wonderful, good story, good example. What can people who've gone through this, what can they do to find their way out of what maybe they've had as a pretty rough time?
Well, I think the first is to find someone who is going to listen, because the hardest thing Niara told me was, it's one thing saying you've had an encounter or abducted by aliens, for example. It's another when you are saying human beings are doing this to human beings, and who is going to listen to that?
Well, currently, if somebody says that in hospital, we've just tonight had an example. I've just been off the phone from Holland, where a woman who has said to her doctor in hospital, "I've been abducted." They put her immediately into a lunatic asylum. But the interesting thing is that when she was allowed access to the computer, she found that all the previous history of searches by the previous patients have all been an alien abduction. So it seems that the first port of call is you're loopy, go off to the lunatic asylum. And we've had another MASH witness who's had a pretty horrific experience because based on his blood group and DNA, they were trying to shut him down pretty gruesomely. So it's not too safe not too safe. There's not too many people like yourself around. What can these people do without ending up being committed?
I think they have to sound out anyone they speak to. It's not enough just to say, well, they're a counsellor or a psychologist or whatever. You've got to talk to them in a way that you get a sense of whether they are going to be open to this or not. And I write about this in Awakening. How do you test out your support? And you ask some very simple questions. You know, do they believe that there's life out, in the cosmos? Do they believe that some of them may be visiting this planet, for example? If they, that's going to tell you something. Also, have they ever come across anyone that's had experiences? You can do this over the phone. You don't even have to give your name or identity. So you can check them out. One recently was interesting because it was a psychologist here in Australia that contacted me saying she wanted to support people who had encounters. And interestingly, she said, I feel really bad because a guy came to me with encounters and I said it was probably some abuse as a child. And she said, but actually since then I've realized I've had encounters too. And so she headed the guy to me and apologized to him because of what she'd said, because she was coming from the traditional mandate of, yes, well, there's something, it's got to be some kind of abuse, when she realized that she was having encounters herself and so are her children. So, this is what's going on. There's going to be a lot of this, I think, in the next few years as more and more people come out with their experiences.
Well, we're having to wrap up because this is absolutely fantastic. You're very good in the morning. Just one cup of coffee. It's fantastic. Do you have any final words on this? And this is an absolutely fantastic update. I've really so positive, encouraging that the children are changing and people are changing themselves. And it's such a wonderfully good, wonderful story to start the year in 2013. And any final words?
I would say, more than anything, listen to your children, because they're the new ones coming in and they're going to help us with this whole shift. And the more we listen to each other and stop discriminating against experiences and just listen, we may actually learn why we're here and what it's all about. And
Mary, you're based in a little place south of the Thames estuary. How do people get hold of you, and are you planning any trips abroad or seeing any parts of the world in the future?
At the moment, I'm not going overseas this year, but that can change. At the moment, I'm doing domestic, Sydney, Perth and Brisbane. But of course, that can change. I do a lot of interviews, as you know. To contact me, though, is very easy. You go on my website. It's got my email there. I'm on the computer most days. I also do Skype sessions, including hypnosis. So you can contact me that way as well. But just Google Mary Rodwell and you won't have any problem contacting me whatsoever.
Well, Mary Rodwell, good morning to you, and thanks for an absolutely brilliant and fascinating update. And the first interview was pretty passionate as well, if not more so. My God, I think the table was being thumped. Anyway, God bless. Many thanks indeed, Mary. You're looking great. Got a great place, and it's good news that you've been saying today, and fascinating. And God bless and good night.
God bless to you, Miles, and thank you again for allowing me to be on what you're doing, because I think you are doing an amazing job. So you just keep doing what you're doing, because good on you for that.
And you just keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a fine job. Okay, good night and God bless.
Good night.